The story of the American Revolution is not one of sudden uprising, but of a slow burn. It was a gradual build-up of frustrations and grievances that simmered over time, eventually reaching a boiling point. It began with a seed of discontent planted in the hearts of colonists who had crossed an ocean for a new life. These settlers, driven by dreams of freedom and prosperity, left behind the familiar shores of Europe to carve out a new existence in an unknown land. They sought freedom and opportunity, a chance to build a society free from the constraints of the old world. In the vast, untamed wilderness, they found the promise of a fresh start where hard work and determination could yield a better future. Yet across the Atlantic, the British Crown saw things differently. To the monarchy and its advisors, the American colonies were not just settlements, but vital assets in the grand scheme of the British Empire. The colonies were seen as a source of revenue, a marketplace for British goods, and a proving ground for imperial power. The Crown's policies were designed to extract wealth and resources, ensuring that the colonies remained economically dependent on the mother country. This fundamental disconnect bred resentment and mistrust. The colonists, who had grown accustomed to a degree of autonomy, felt increasingly stifled by the Crown's heavy-handed approach. The colonists, accustomed to a degree of self-governance, bristled at taxes levied without their consent. They had their own local assemblies and councils, which they believed should have a say in how they were taxed and governed. Acts like the Stamp Act and the Townshend Acts, intended to assert British control and fill royal coffers, only served to fan the flames of rebellion. These measures were seen as direct assaults on the liberties that the colonists had come to cherish. The cry of no taxation without representation became a rallying cry, a testament to the growing divide between the colonies and their mother country. It encapsulated the colonists' demand for a voice in their own affairs and their refusal to be treated as mere subjects of the Crown. The relationship between Britain and its American colonies grew increasingly strained. Each new policy and tax imposed by the Crown was met with greater resistance and defiance from the colonists. The vast distance between London and Boston, coupled with slow and unreliable communication, exacerbated misunderstandings. Messages and directives from the Crown took weeks, sometimes months, to reach the colonies, by which time local conditions had often changed. Each attempt by the Crown to assert its authority was met with increasing resistance, pushing the two sides closer to the brink of conflict. The colonists' growing sense of identity and unity only strengthened their resolve to stand against what they saw as tyranny. The stage was set for a momentous clash. The colonies, with their diverse populations and varied interests, were beginning to coalesce around a common cause, the fight for their rights and freedoms. It would be a conflict that would test the bonds of empire, ignite a revolution, and reshape the world. The American Revolution was not just a war for independence, it was a battle for the very principles of self-determination and democracy. The American colonies, a patchwork of diverse settlements clinging to the Atlantic coast, were about to embark on a perilous journey for independence. This journey would be fraught with challenges and sacrifices, but it would ultimately lead to the birth of a new nation, founded on the ideals of liberty and justice for all. As tensions escalated, acts of defiance, both symbolic and strategic, erupted across the colonies. These acts were not isolated incidents, but part of a growing wave of resistance against British rule. The Boston Tea Party, a daring raid on British ships carrying tea, became an iconic act of resistance. It was a bold statement against the British-imposed taxes and a direct challenge to the authority of the Crown. Colonists, disguised as Native Americans, dumped chests of tea into Boston Harbor, sending shockwaves across the Atlantic. This dramatic act of defiance was a clear message that the colonies would not be subjugated without a fight. This act of defiance was not about tea itself, but about a principle, the right of the colonies to govern themselves. It was a stand against the tyranny of taxation without representation, a core grievance that united the colonists. The British response was swift and harsh. Determined to reassert control, the Crown implemented a series of punitive measures. The Intolerable Acts, as they were called by the colonists, closed the port of Boston, curtailed local government, and further inflamed tensions. These acts were designed to isolate and punish Massachusetts, but they had the opposite effect. The colonies, recognizing the need for unity, convened the First Continental Congress in 1774. This gathering was a significant step towards collective action. Delegates from 12 colonies, united by a common cause, met in Philadelphia to discuss their grievances and strategize their response. They debated passionately, each bringing their colony's unique perspective to the table. The First Continental Congress was a pivotal moment in the road to revolution. It was here that the colonies began to see themselves not just as individual entities, but as part of a larger united front. It marked a transition from isolated acts of protest to a coordinated movement for colonial rights. The sense of unity and shared purpose was palpable. The Congress drafted a Declaration of Rights and Grievances, asserting their right to life, liberty, and property. This document was a powerful statement of their collective resolve. They agreed to boycott British goods, striking at the heart of the mercantile system that bound them to the crown. This economic resistance was a crucial tactic in their struggle for autonomy. Though not yet ready to declare independence, the seeds of revolution had been sown. The discussions and decisions made at the Congress laid the groundwork for future actions. The Continental Congress, through its actions and pronouncements, had laid the groundwork for a unified resistance. Their efforts were a beacon of hope for those yearning for freedom. The colonies, once disparate and divided, were beginning to see themselves as a single people, bound by a shared destiny and a growing desire for self-determination. This newfound unity would be crucial in the battles to come as they moved ever closer to the goal of independence. The year 1775 dawned with an air of uncertainty and anticipation. The early morning light cast long shadows over the colonial towns, where the whispers of revolution were growing louder each day. The colonies, though united in their grievances against British rule, were still deeply divided on the question of independence. Town hall meetings were filled with heated debates as neighbors and friends found themselves on opposite sides of the argument. Many colonists remained loyal to the Crown, believing that reconciliation was still possible. They waved British flags and argued passionately for peace. Meanwhile, others, inspired by the ideals of liberty and self-governance, believed that war was inevitable and necessary for true freedom. That fateful spring, the simmering tensions finally boiled over in a small Massachusetts town. The air was thick with anticipation as both sides prepared for the inevitable clash. On April 19, 1775, British troops marched towards Concord, seeking to seize colonial military supplies. The Redcoats moved with precision, their mission clear and their resolve unshaken. They were met by a fierce resistance from colonial militiamen at Lexington Green. These local farmers and tradesmen, armed with muskets and a fierce determination, stood their ground against the professional soldiers of the British Empire. The shot, heard round the world, rang out, marking the beginning of the American Revolutionary War. This single musket shot, whose origin remains a mystery, set off a chain of events that would change the course of history. Though a skirmish by military standards, the battles of Lexington and Concord ignited a firestorm that would consume the colonies. Buildings burned, and the smell of gunpowder filled the air as both sides regrouped and prepared for the next confrontation. News of the fighting spread like wildfire, igniting a wave of patriotic fervor. Town criers and newspapers carried the news to every corner of the colonies, rallying support for the revolutionary cause. Militiamen from across New England converged on Boston, laying siege to the city and trapping the British garrison within. The siege of Boston marked the first major strategic victory for the colonial forces, bolstering their confidence and resolve. The Second Continental Congress, convened just weeks after the battles, faced the daunting task of managing a war they had not sought but could no longer avoid. The delegates, representing a diverse array of colonies, debated fiercely but ultimately recognized the necessity of unity and decisive action. The die was cast. The colonies, once seeking reconciliation, were now locked in a struggle for their very survival. Men and women from all walks of life prepared for the long and arduous fight ahead, driven by a shared vision of independence and self-determination. The American Revolution, a war for independence and self-determination, had begun. The colonies, united in their quest for freedom, marched forward with a newfound sense of purpose and destiny, ready to forge a new nation from the fires of revolution. The early years of the war were a baptism by fire for the fledgling Continental Army. Outnumbered, outgunned, and lacking experience, they faced the might of the British Empire. General George Washington, a Virginia planter, thrust into the role of commander-in-chief, faced the monumental task of forging a cohesive fighting force from a collection of colonial militias. The Battle of Bunker Hill, fought just outside Boston in June 1775, was a costly victory for the British. Though they captured the hill, they suffered heavy casualties, proving that the colonial forces were not to be underestimated. However, the British maintained control of Boston, forcing Washington to evacuate the city in March 1776 after a daring nighttime fortification of Dorchester Heights. The war raged on, with victories and defeats on both sides. The British, confident in their superior firepower and discipline, sought to deliver a decisive blow that would crush the rebellion. The colonists, fighting on their own soil, relied on guerrilla tactics and the unwavering support of the civilian population. Each battle, each skirmish, tested the resolve of both sides, pushing them to the limits of their endurance.